Well, even if you're not sure what it is or how it works, chances are you've seen Uber in the news and hotly debated lately. And even if you think you'll never use it, proponents of the ride-sharing service say if St. Louis wants to be a top-tier city, it needs Uber. But not so fast, say cab drivers and regulators. They cite safety concerns, and it's not hard to see that Uber could cut into taxi cab business. Innovation, regulation, sustaining decent wages. Uber isn't simple. So what should St. Louis do? Stay tuned. Stay Tuned brings together local experts, journalists, civic leaders, and regular people to have tough conversations for a stronger St. Louis. Add your voice to our conversation, and you're at the table as we stay on top of current events and go deeper, bringing more light and less heat to the issues that matter. From the 9 network of public media in Grand Center, this is Stay Tuned. Whether Uber is the future of transportation or a rogue company that refuses to play by the rules, the fact that it's disruptive is not really in dispute. Here's how it works. Riders find drivers via an app. Uber drivers use their personal cars and work when they want. No cash changes hands. Riders are charged to a credit card that's set up through the app. And riders and drivers rate each other after the ride. The Metropolitan Taxi Commission says Uber is a cab and must follow taxi cab rules, like FBI background checks and fingerprinting for drivers, before the commission will allow it to operate in St. Louis City or county. Uber calls the regulations overbearing and a deal breaker. But for many, the Uber issue is about more than just how we get around.
The entire controversy surrounding Uber underscores a real problem with St. Louis bureaucracy and why people perceive it to be a city where you can't do cool things and get things done.
It speaks to the barriers that are presented by the political and the corporate leaders here.
I was a taxi driver in New York City, and unfortunately Uber, what it does, it undermines wages for drivers.
Uber is already on the road in St. Charles County, the Metro East, and in Columbia and Kansas City. The Taxi Cab Commission is expected to vote this month on whether to allow Uber in St. Louis City and County. It's a topic that, while it's broad and perhaps has broad implications for the region, it's also very personal, very passionate for some folks. We'll hear from them coming up in the show. But first, to start us off in the studio, Brian Felt from the St. Louis Business Journal has been covering this very topic. How would you describe the Uber entrance, or maybe an attempt to enter the St. Louis market?
I would say it's similar to the way they've entered other cities, and it's, I would say, aggressive. They've actually prided themselves on being an aggressive company. This is a startup that is cool with young people. It's new, it's got the backing of Google, and they're aggressive in how they come into markets, and they demand a lot. They want the regulations to fit to what they want and how they want to enter a city. And so I think aggressive would be a good way to put it. And has it worked in most cases? Did they get their way? Well, certainly they're in a lot of big cities around the country. Now, Uber, with the way they entered St. Louis, they came in and they started talking about what type of regulations they needed. They don't think that they should be regulated as a taxi company because they don't own any cars. They don't actually have any employees. So they come in and they say what they need, and it's been messy, it's been contentious, there's been name calling, and it looks like it's starting to come to more of a resolution, or at least becoming more clear. Some news on that on Thursday. Catch us up to speed. The MTC, Metropolitan Taxi Commission, are they making concessions? What did you make of Thursday's news? Yeah, there's been a little bit more than a dozen points that Uber wanted the MTC to consider and to revise in their code. I think they've already come to terms, or at least said that they can make it happen on about a dozen of them. There remain 3 key issues. One was insurance, the other was fingerprint testing, and the other was drug testing. Now, insurance seems like it'll probably be something that it will get resolved. The MTC today, or Thursday, came out and said that they think that they could probably get past drug testing too. In other words, not letting Uber drivers submit to drug tests. But it does appear that the third issue, the fingerprint background checks, which for the MTC are performed by the FBI and the Missouri State Highway Patrol, is going to be a sticking point. From what I'm hearing from Uber, they are saying that that is, could be a deal breaker in terms of them not applying for a TNC license, a Transportation Network Company license, that will let them do business here. What do you hear from the business community, or the startup community, or the tech community, if we don't get Uber? Does it matter? There's different camps. You know, there are a lot of business people who probably still don't really exactly know what Uber are, and so they haven't taken a stance. But the people that are familiar with technology, people that are on their iPhones a lot, almost all of them know about Uber, and most of them had said, yeah, we would be better off with Uber. They've said, we're having trouble, or we could foresee having trouble luring talent here to St. Louis if they come in, get out of the airport and say, wait, what, you don't have Uber here? How am I supposed to get around? A lot of these people, you know, may not have cars, or they would rather walk, or, you know, they want that form of transportation. And
I gather these tactics, the aggressiveness has worked in most places. What's their success rate, or what's their reputation?
Well, Uber's been met with resistance almost everywhere they've gone. There were just riots in France, overturned cars and cars on fire. They've broken through, and cities have essentially given in to their demands and have made regulations that form to Uber, and therefore they're in those cities. Now, that's not exactly where we're at in St. Louis right now, but in many other cities they have formed to help Uber.
So the MTC here locally, they're not alone. There's a precedent for a fight against Uber, to say the least, from a regulatory standpoint.
Yes and no. They're not alone in that they've resisted changing their bylaws and their codes to Uber. But then again, Uber is in a lot of other cities right now, and they're not in St. Louis.
They like to say this is the largest city without Uber, perhaps maybe the largest metro area. You hear that when you talk to Uber as well.
Yeah, certainly that's a sticking point that they like to talk about, and certainly St. Louis is among one of the biggest cities that doesn't have Uber, and you know, they like to tout that.
Brian Felt, thank you for your time. But stick around. We'd like to have you back at the end of the show. We also had the opportunity to talk to a representative from Uber. They've been in and out of town, as you know. So this time we actually caught them via Google Hangout. Here's what the folks at Uber had to say about St. Louis.
Uber, simply put, is an app on your phone that connects riders with drivers. Just at the push of a button, you're able to call a car that can come and pick you up in minutes. What's really great about Uber is that we are now in 150 cities around the United States, over 300 cities around the world. It's truly transformed the way people get around. With our low-cost option, which is UberX, and that's cheaper than a taxi, this means rides, but it also means jobs and flexible income opportunities in which people are able to work at their own schedule part-time by driving with a platform like UberX. Uber's model is very different. We're not a taxi company. The whole premise of Uber is based on a lot of people working part-time and a lot of individuals working just a couple hours a week. That's what allows for the reliability and the flexibility that we have on the platform, so that anybody can get a ride within 5 minutes. St. Louis is the largest metropolitan area in the United States without Uber. And the last few weeks alone have really, I think, shown that the people of St. Louis are really standing up, really want more options for transportation in their city, really want more options for Uber in their city, and they're making their voices heard. The process of bringing Uber to St. Louis has been going through the Metropolitan Taxi Commission, who has the ability to bring Uber on July 29th, which is their next meeting. And this is something that they know what they can do that would open the doors for Uber to come to St. Louis. And it's really important that they do the right thing and that they allow for this new option here for the people of St. Louis. There's been a lot of discussion about how that's possible, and ultimately it comes down to modern regulations, the similar types of regulations that have been enacted across the country. And it's important for the Metropolitan Taxi Commission to know that times have changed. Things aren't the same as they were 15, 20 years ago. The world's changed, and the world's changed through technology. And it's important to adapt regulations that move with those advances in technology, and not continue to kind of live in a world before the creation of smartphones or the internet. There have been a lot of discussions around things like safety and background checks. And Uber enacts background checks through every single driver before they're brought on the system. We take that very seriously, and every single driver goes through a rigorous background check before they're brought on the system. Those background checks are different than what's currently run by the Missouri State Highway Patrol and what the MTC sees fit to implement. And we're doing over 1 million rides a day around the world, which is an incredible scale. We focus on safety not just before the ride. So again, we're not just looking at background checks, which has been the status quo for so many years. We look at safety through the entire completion of the ride. From the moment that a customer requests the ride to the moment they get into the car to the moment the trip is complete. Our background check is, will take a few days to complete, and in certain cases, the company will dive into individual court records, go into these individual court communities and dig up the most relevant filings. So it's incredibly rigorous. We check through several different databases and through several different counties, as well as things like the sex offender registry and the terrorist watch list to ensure that, there's a incredibly strong amount of rigor and thoroughness that goes into it. More options are always better for consumers. And people continue to use taxis, people continue to use buses, people continue to use trains. Now people will use Uber, right? And while we plan to have several opportunities, several individuals come on the platform, the way the Uber model works is that it's a lot of people doing a little bit at a given time. And these are part-time, flexible opportunities for individuals. So while one individual on the platform may not necessarily mean they're working a full-time hour or shift on Uber necessarily, they could just be doing a couple hours in the weeks. But ultimately, more competition and more choices is a good thing. And I think this is ultimately what's better for customers as well. We're very dedicated to the St. Louis market and have been working at this for over a year now and very much want to be here. Again, it's the largest metropolitan area in the United States without Uber. And the people of St. Louis really need this and have been clamoring for this. So we're very dedicated to have this option available and for the great need and resources that come with it.
So that's the Uber perspective. We're very happy to have in the studio the Metropolitan Taxi Cab Commission, attorney for the MTC, Neil Bruntrager. Neil, why doesn't the MTC want Uber in St. Louis?
The MTC does want Uber in St. Louis, but we also want public safety, and those things have to go hand in hand. Uber is more than welcome to come here. We've tried to set it up for them to come here. We've made it as simple as we can make it for them. They simply don't want any regulation. We have a duty under the law to make sure that the vehicles for hire that operate in this area operate in a manner that protects the public. And that's all we're saying. We've got 3 really simple conditions that, by the way, we are seeing them employ in New York City, and we're seeing them employ in Houston. So again, it's simple. If Uber wants to come to St. Louis, it's up to Uber. We've made it as simple as we can make it.
I think they would disagree that it's as simple as possible, but they at the very least, they don't like some of the terms, right. Not the least of which is the background checking, the fingerprinting, things of that nature. They do their background checks. We just heard it. They also they claim more insurance than you require. Why isn't that good enough?
Well, let's talk about background checks first, because biometric checks are what we're talking about in terms of what we're doing. We're talking about fingerprint checks. Their checks are, you give them your name, you give them your birth date, you give them your social security number, and they use a private vendor who goes out and searches just as anyone could on the internet. They tell us that they go to courthouses and that sort of thing, but under Missouri law, there are records that they can never get, that are closed records, that they are prevented by law from getting.
That you can get?
That I can absolutely get through the FBI and through the Missouri Highway Patrol. And we are mandated to get, by the way. So let's remember that these ideas of background checks where I'm arguing this, I'm not saying this because I think it's a good idea. I'm saying it because state statute says we must do that. Now, let's talk about these
You're not being too picky on the background check there for a person who just wants to drive me from point A to point B.
No, we can't be. I mean, it's not a situation where we are, in our discretion, are saying, let's do background checks in some instances. We have to in every vehicle for hire. It's mandated in the statutes that create the Taxi Cab Commission. Now, they want to compare us to the rest of the world. Not the rest of the world has statutes like we do. We must enforce those statutes. But let's talk about what a background check looks like, okay? I go in and I give you my fingerprints. That gets sent to the Highway Patrol and it gets sent to the FBI. If there is a closed record under Missouri law, and you can look it up, it's in the Sunshine Law, Chapter 610, talks about what's a closed record. A first offense Most of those end up in what we call a suspended imposition of sentence.
First offense of?
Anything. But usually, let's talk about something relevant to a driver, a DWI. Most first offense DWIs end up with a suspended imposition of sentence. Once that probation has been completed, that record is closed by law. The only person that can access that record is a law enforcement agency, period, end of story. I don't care what Uber says, there is no way they can legally get into those records. And what could be more useful when deciding whether or not a person should drive or not? They can't get those records.
Moving on from the records for 1 second, you said you're making it as simple as possible, but clearly the public perception in St. Louis is that the MTC is a bunch of Luddites who just can't get with it in 2015.
Yeah.
Are you behind the times, or do you need to be more flexible? Do you need to look at this new way of getting from point A to point B?
We can't be flexible in terms of what the statutes mandate that we do. These aren't our rules. These are rules that are made by the state legislature. So if people don't like those are rules that get changed in Jefferson City, not in St. Louis. In terms of moving people from point A to point B, we make every effort to make that as easy as we can. Frankly, the technology that they're talking about, that's available in any number of forms right now for St. Louis taxi cabs. They can use that right now, right here. So again, what we're losing is the PR game. But the fact of the matter is, we are more than open to these ideas. There's nothing that we're trying to do in terms of preventing technology from coming here. But it's not about technology. It's about public safety.
Is it not about jobs? I've got to believe that you would be worried about taxi driver jobs.
Well, here, yes, it is about jobs. And if you compare the jobs that Uber claims they're going to create to the jobs that we know exist right now, I think there's no comparison. All right, now again, keep in mind, this whole idea of jobs and what's an employee and what's not is going to be a big issue as Uber comes in. There's just been a ruling in California that says that the Uber
parts of the country.
Right, that the Uber drivers are not independent contractors, they are in fact employees. Well, if you're an employee, you got to pay taxes on these guys, you got to give them benefits, there are all sorts of things that apply. Again, that could come here, and that could be a big issue here. We want jobs, but we want sustainable jobs. The taxi industry employs people, and many, many people, who make all of their income in taxis. So again, are you going to take jobs to give jobs? It's a balance that you have to think about. You can't ignore.
But somehow Columbia, Missouri has figured this out. Kansas City, Missouri has figured this out. And St. Charles County, the Metro East have figured this out.
But they don't have the same statutory structure that we have. So again, in our statutory structure, we have rules that say we have to make sure that we regulate vehicles for hire. And that's what we try and do. And it's a balance. It's unfair to say, you know what, Uber, we're going to let your people come in and you're going to operate as a taxi cab. And I don't care what you say, it's a taxi. Whether you call it a taxi or not, it still operates as a taxi. And when Lyft came in last summer, and we successfully stopped Lyft last summer, Lyft came in and said, we're a ride-sharing company, we're not taxis. Court ruled on all that. Court said, you are, in fact, a taxi company. You perform all the duties that a taxi company performs. So let's not get too far away from that. So again, you can compare us to these other places, but they don't have the same statutory structure that we have, and we simply can't ignore that. We must enforce that structure.
Neil Bruntrigger, thank you for the insight on from that perspective from the MTC. This is another perspective we have to have in this conversation is social media. This is one that brought this topic to our attention, and one that we had a lot of feedback and a lot of discussion on earlier this week online. Let's take a look.
Generally, there are folks who love Uber, hate Uber, or those who have other priorities on their mind besides rideshares. With all the opinions coming from various points of views, this Tuesday's Stay Tuned Twitter chat went from 8 p.m. and lasted until midnight. To some, the conflict around Uber has been a cause of concern of how the Metropolitan Taxicab Commission governs. Others feel like fighting to make Uber a thing in St. Louis shows how we have difficulty changing with the times. Critics of Uber have a number of concerns. They deny being against advances in tech, but point to the health of our economy and protecting employees. Jacob Lambin said, "Rejecting Uber isn't anti-innovation. We all like apps. It's anti-exploiting labor. It keeps services and jobs in poor areas." Local cab driver Umar Lee combats the notion that cab drivers only cater to the nightlife scene. Restauranteurs chimed in with their opinion that Uber would make for a better experience for their guests. One of the more popular tweets from Tuesday night came from Gerard Kraft, this year's James Beard awardee for Best Chef Midwest. He said, "Uber would help every restaurant and bar, period. St. Louis taxis make us look bad regularly. This begs the question, can we as a region afford to not have Uber? Can we not have as many transportation options as possible? Can't we all just get along? Want to be a part of our next chat? Follow us on Twitter at StayTunedSTL and join the conversation on Tuesday nights at 8 p.m. with the hashtag StayTunedSTL.
Okay, we've got a little bit of time and a lot more to talk about. Joining Brian and Neil at the table, Umar Lee, a taxi cab driver himself, and Ed Domain, a tech entrepreneur who's been very exposed yourself personally and emotionally. We'll get to that in just 1 second. Call that a tease in the business. I'm sorry, Ed. Umar, I've seen you in the streets of Ferguson. I've seen you on social media taking on what people would consider progressive causes. Did this issue really break down on red and blue lines politically? Because as a cab driver, I think you're not too excited about Uber when you might align with the Uber camp on a lot of other issues.
Well, I think the Uber camp on this issue has aligned themselves with the techno-libertarian right wing, the group that wants to take the society back to before the New Deal, unregulated capitalism.
So why don't you want Uber? What is a cab doing for St. Louis that Uber drivers won't?
Well, a cab is serving St. Louis. We're serving the metropolitan area. We want to serve everybody. Uber comes in. They just want to serve those with bank accounts with credit cards. We know a large portion of the metropolitan area is unbanked. We know that Uber is not interested, and we look around the country, they're not interested in low-income areas. They're not going to be in North St. Louis. They're not going to be in most of South St. Louis and North County. The cab companies are serving the entire metropolitan area. This is not just about taking people home from bars and nightclubs. You know, I'm taking gunshot wound victims home from the hospital. I'm taking sick kids home from the hospital. We're taking kids to school. We're taking people to and from work every day. We're taking people to the laundromat and back. I had an old man in the cab yesterday. He couldn't even spell the name of his street. You know, he just had a heat stroke.
And you don't think Uber will serve these people?
Uber has no interest in serving these people.
Do you have to take a call even if you don't want to go to a particular?
Yes, I do. And we take it all throughout the metropolitan area. And this is the thing. The discussion online is a discussion between, let's just say it, semi-affluent to affluent hipsters who are only worried about getting from the latte shop to the craft brew spot. Well, it's a lot bigger than that. It's not a game. You need the background checks. You need the insurance.
Ed, there's not enough time in a 30-minute entire show but to talk about all that you've talked about on social media. But I guess let me just start with, why do you think Uber is important to St. Louis?
Well, it's a free market issue. You can't engage in protectionism. It doesn't make any sense. And to my new friend's point over here, I have been asked to take to different neighborhoods in the city before and use a credit card, and the cab driver has told me I won't turn on my credit card machine because if they know I'm going to that neighborhood, I have to take other calls. So I think there's a little fallacy in the fact that they take people home. Hospitals have reached out to me and told me they have a hard time getting cabs to come pick up the poor that they have to give a voucher to take them home.
So what do you make of the cab service? Pre-Uber, with or without Uber? Are you satisfied? You're not from the area, you're from Chicago, you've moved around, your business takes you
elsewhere. Been here 3 years now.
So what do you make of the cab business? Is this a market that is adequately served?
No, it's a mess. And I've interviewed cab drivers who are all terrified to go on the record publicly because they're afraid they'll be fired, and they hate the MTC. They hate the way they're treated. They're forced to use credit card processing companies that take 7% of their income. They want to use Square. Some of the companies won't let them do it because they get the cab drivers say their bosses get kickbacks at the cab company.
So if this Uber fight doesn't go the way you would like to see it go?
Well, on July 29th, we're going to bring a couple hundred people to the MTC meeting. We'll give public notice so they have a chance to get a big enough room. The biggest names in the city have signed up to support me, not just the hipster, liberal techies, but Joe Reagan of the St. Louis Regional Chamber, Maxine Clark of Build-A-Bear, who's done $5 billion in revenue. These are real people, real leaders that want to see progress come to St. Louis because they think it's embarrassing that we're not with the times.
People have not been happy with cabs for some time. I don't think that's entirely a secret.
Well, let me address this real quickly, because this isn't about the free market. This is about public safety. And again, what we have to do at the MTC is make sure that we oversee the operation of taxi cabs. And overseeing them means that we make sure that the background checks are done on the drivers. We make sure that we have as much information as we can possibly have. We make sure that we oversee the insurance, and I know that that's a dispute among others, but we do everything that can be done. The idea of bringing Uber in, and I know that's been a big argument by Mr. Domain, is this insurance issue as it applied to him personally. personally. But the idea of Uber is they will give us none of this information. So again, if he thinks that he's been victimized because there was a cab that had an issue, and I'm familiar with that issue and can discuss that issue at depth, but again, if you think that you're going to solve that problem by bringing in Uber, who will not identify their drivers, who will not provide background check information other than to say we do it, and will not give us any of their insurance information on their individual drivers, you're out of your mind if you say
Casey, that makes no sense, because if the fingerprint issue is such a big issue, Chief Dotson has said it's not a concern for him. And if they're willing to waive it right now temporarily, what sense does that make? How can we be safe if they're going to waive it temporarily? And as far as the other issue goes, with safety, every driver, every car in Uber is being tracked by GPS. You know where it is. If someone's in trouble, they're going to rate the driver bad. The driver can rate the passenger badly. With a cab, you have no guarantee whatsoever.
We have less than 1 minute. Can both exist?
You need to follow the hashtag Ubered, because if there's a lot of complaints about cabs, there's a lot of complaints about Ubers in city after cities, including a lot of arrests of drivers. We just had a terrible rape case this week with an Uber driver. So those background checks
cab drivers don't do those things?
And the truth of the matter is they're not going to share that information. Uber simply won't do it. We'll never know who they are. So his argument that, look, we can follow them, they can, but we can't. So if you're victimized in an Uber car, there's absolutely nothing you can do, unless you want to try and sue them in San Francisco, and good luck.
Well, there you go again, Neil. You say that the MTC's jobs is to regulate cabs, but they couldn't regulate the cab that almost killed me. So how can we trust them to regulate
Time
Uber?
out for 1 second. We're going to keep this discussion going online. That's all the time we have on air, so we'll have the rest online. Gentlemen, thank you all. Hang tight 1 second. We still don't have all the time in the world, but just to catch up, if people haven't seen you, I'll try my best to summarize. You were in a cab, and you in a terrible, terrible, life-threatening accident, and God love you, we're glad you're here. It was very close.
It's the reason I'm doing this. I don't want it to happen to anybody else.
Because the cab was inadequately insured?
It was not insured, and I have court documents proving that. I'm sure I'll hear a counterpoint, but that is the fact. It is a fact.
So do you see a world where both of these can exist?
Absolutely. I have nothing against cabs. I think cabs are great. I've used cabs in other cities. I admired your fight to wear the clothing that you choose to wear, not the ridiculous uniform the MTC requires. I've taken cabs with Muslim drivers in other cities and never had an issue. Let cabs and Uber both compete fairly in St. Louis.
And of course that means that if you're going to compete fairly, that everybody's on the same playing field. And what we're saying is Uber has to step up to this playing field, because we have mandatory background checks, we have mandatory requirements that we don't have the discretion or the luxury to decide we're not going to employ.
Except Chief Dotson,
Dotson
has said it's okay, and he's perfectly happy. He has actually asked the chief. Let's check with the chief and find what he has to say.
Check this show. We're going to get with the chief.
Absolutely.
It comes down to this. What we have suggested is that we will, at this point, employ background checks.
Why are you temporarily waiving the fingerprint check?
Because we're trying to make it easier for Uber.
So you're willing to risk people's safety by waiving the...
You have to let me finish if you're going to ask me a question. You have to let me answer.
I feel that you're dominating.
Okay, one at a time. Neil, go ahead.
Okay, so it comes back to this. What we have said to Uber is that, look, we'll make this as easy for you as we can. You have to do the background checks. You have to do the fingerprints. We'll waive the costs. And we will let you have a provisional license while we do the background check. But we do the same thing for cab drivers. We do the same thing for Mr. Lee. So again, what we're saying is we're saving you money. We're going to bring a kiosk in. We're going to make this as quick as we can and as painless as we can. And they've said we don't want to do that. They're doing it in New York. They're doing it in Houston. Why wouldn't they do it here?
You think there are regulations that they are abiding by in other markets that they're unwilling to?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're in touch with these people all over the country.
The other commissions.
Yes. Go ahead.
And I think we're looking at this wrong in a couple of different ways. Number one, people are saying this is in every major city except for St. Louis. I think that's a credit to St. Louis, that we have been able to stand up, protect the community, protect our industry. You don't always have to run off the cliff with everybody else. Then it's a credit to St. Louis. I think number two, you look at this guy, Cigar Shaw from Uber. Guy's not from St. Louis, coming in from Chicago, coming in and out, doesn't know anything about St. Louis. The company has no ties to St. Louis.
People might say that that's a provincial mentality. We talked about it last week. It's holding us back.
No,
we want people coming in from
I don't think
other
it's
parts
holding
of the
us
country.
back. I don't think it's holding us back. This is part of a greater economic trend where our cities are being devastated. The working class are being devastated. They're being driven out of our cities. We're having massive gentrification, all on the back of development and progress. And that's why I say It's not a blue and red issue, because a lot of these people who label themselves as progressives, at the end of the day, they're economically on the right wing of the spectrum. So I don't think that we have companies and drivers committed to the city of St. Louis, committed here, generations here, and Uber does not have that.
Are you worried about Uber decimating good-paying jobs like Uber?
The cab drivers I've talked to hate the MTC and are terrorized by the MTC, and they're unwilling to go on record. One of them is about to talk to Brian and do another report, so I can prove that I am talking to cab drivers, as he can verify. And I would like to know why it's okay to waive a fingerprint check up front as a temporary measure, but then it's going to be required later. So when we waive it temporarily, we're putting the public at danger. If the public's going to be in danger by waiving it temporarily, why would you waive it temporarily? That makes no sense.
And we're not waiving it. What we're saying to you is that we're going to do it, and while we're doing the background check, because those don't take a moment, those don't take 3 days like Uber claims, that takes a long time to get it done, because we can get into records that Uber can't. So again, in the interim, we're going to accept your background checks, and we ask them for that information. We said, send us your background checks. In this provisional period, we will take the fingerprints and we will do this. Now look, anybody who doesn't think I can't today, with a name, an ID, a social security number, and a birth date, get false documentation, is simply got their head in the sand. Talk about Luddites. We don't know who's driving these cars. We know there are problems, and part of California's issue right now with Uber is that Uber won't turn over this information, which is why there's a $7.3 million fine that's been imposed upon them.
I think we'll see them do that. They realize they can't do that.
But they didn't. They didn't, and that's
just
how
like
they
the
play the
MTC
game.
didn't insure your cab. That's how the MTC plays the game.
You are being disingenuous with that, because
really?
you know, yes.
I was almost killed, and I still haven't received the settlement for the cab I was in.
The taxi cab that you were in was in a fleet policy that apparently there was an issue. No, that we check twice a year.
Oh, now you check twice a year. On Camel X, you said once a year.
1 month before you were in that accident, that cab was inspected by the MTC, and it had an insurance card, and it had an insurance
But the MTC says that they're co-insured and they're added to the policy,
listen, fellas,
so you find out if the policy
guys, I don't get paid enough to litigate this entire case. So give me 1 second. Let's bring it back. That's okay. Let's go back to a little bit a higher level of perspective here, and not to imply that was a low-level discussion.
Quite all right.
I'm curious if you think that we saw this lawsuit in California. Do you see more of those coming? And if you can give us the brief update on what's going on in California just this week, is that something we might see? Is Umar right that while everybody's excited to accept Uber, they're actually running off a cliff?
Well, I'm not totally up to speed on what's happening in San Francisco, but I mean, I think you almost certainly will see this head to court. July 29th, it sounds as if 2 of the 3 sticking points will be resolved, and the 1 sticking point, MTC says it's stuck, its hands are tied, it can't do anything, it's state law. Well, you know, Uber's not going to accept that, so they're going to butt heads, and it's not going to work out. So at that point, it's going to be.
It is really in a nutshell. But look, Lyft did the same thing last summer. Lyft just tried to bust the doors in, and Lyft is exactly the same. Lyft just simply said the rules don't apply to us. We can do whatever the heck we want to do. And they came in and we stopped them. We stopped them cold on those issues.
But on the 29th, is that it? Is it done and over from your perspective, one way or another?
We're going to make every effort that we can make in order to make this a place where Uber can come within the confines of the state law that we have to.
At that point,
I have an interesting question. This is very important.
To get back to that point, at that point, it would be incumbent on County Executive Stanger and Mayor Slay to, if they wanted Uber to come to town, then they should go to the legislature and try to change that state policy.
The legislature is going to be taking away the MTC's right to regulate. I have it on authority from the state capitol. The legislators have reached out to me. They're going to pull that authority. So I don't even know why we're still talking about it, even though they have a paid lobbyist in Jefferson City. But the important thing to think about here is Mr. Bruntrager's comments, which I appreciate. He said Uber drivers in California are not being paid benefits because they are considered employees. The taxi cab drivers in St. Louis do not get benefits because they're called independent contractors. If they don't earn $75 a day, they don't get paid. And cab drivers have told me there's plenty of days where they haven't gotten paid. So if Uber should be treating their drivers like employees and they should be getting benefits, I'd love to see the cab companies with St. Louis start giving health insurance to their drivers and start treating them fairly instead of chasing them around with their fake police and ticketing them for things that don't make any sense.
You happy with the MTC?
I speak for the drivers. MTC, some issues we agree, some issues we don't agree. On the issue of that, I would like to see all Uber drivers made employees and get benefits and see if that model will work for them. We know it won't work for them. We know they won't be able to return the profits to their investors.
Cab drivers
and I would like to see cab drivers get benefits as well. So, yeah.
So I will say this in the end. It really comes down to this. there are lots of allegations that have been made by Mr. Domain that are frankly unsupported by any of the facts.
Actually, I have court documents proving
it comes down to a situation where if you look at the documents, they don't support what he said. But
oh, that's inaccurate.
Well, you're simply misstating the facts.
I guess my attorney also lied to me, Jerry Schlichter.
You know, Jerry Schlichter's a fine man. I'm not going to reflect on that at all. But again, it comes back to this. Maybe you don't understand. Maybe that's the long and short of it.
Maybe you are not aware of what
let him finish. We're at like 60 seconds for real left.
We have a statutory structure that we have to follow. No matter what Uber wants to do, they have to play within those rules and those regulations. We've tried to make it as easy as we can for them. We've sat down, we've explained it to them any number of times. We're not asking them to do anything that they're not doing in other places.
Okay, we'll leave it there. We have just a few seconds. Your prospects, the outlook for St. Louis in the tech scene that you work in if we don't get Uber?
It's bad. Locker Dome CEO Gabe Lozano has already said he's had an employee decline to move here, a potential employee decline to move here because St. Louis looks backwards. St. Louis should be a great city, not a functional city.
We don't need it.
And anybody that believes in this, Washington, D.C. legislators have reached out to me. Text 52886 on your phone right now, and you're going to see an activist network around the country respond. 52886.
These are the carpetbaggers that want to come to St. Louis. No respect for locals.
I've been living here for 3 years.
No, but you are interrupting.
No respect for locals. No respect for anything. Coming here with privilege, want to uproot everything. We don't need that guy in St. Louis.
All right, we got to go. That's all the time we've got. Gentlemen, thanks for the spirited discussion.
Thank you.
Stay tuned.
Thanks.